Montana Territory, 1873. The first shot shattered the saloon window. The second tore through Zadie Newell's father before she could even scream. Glass fragments rained across the rough-hewn floor of Coulter's Creek's only saloon as Thaddeus Newell crumpled beside the piano, crimson blooming across his vest. His fingers still curved, as if playing the last chord he'd ever strike. "Papa," Zadie lunged toward him, her emerald-green dress swishing around her ankles, her chestnut brown hair falling in waves as her hat tumbled free. At 22, she'd seen death before. The frontier demanded its tributes, but nothing had prepared her for watching her father's life drain away on dirty floorboards. Strong arms caught her mid-stride, pulling her down behind an overturned table as a third bullet splintered the wood where she would have been standing. "Stay down if you want to keep breathing," growled a low voice in her ear. Her rescuer smelled of leather, horses, and the wild sage that blanketed the Montana hills. His body was hard against hers, lean but powerful. When she twisted to look at him, she found herself staring into eyes the color of a summer thunderstorm, deep gray with hints of blue. "Let me go," she demanded, struggling against his grip. "That's my father." "And that's Grayson's men out there," he countered, nodding toward the broken window. "Your father's gone, ma'am. Nothing to be done now except make sure you don't join him." Zadie went still, the terrible truth of his words sinking in alongside the realization of who held her. Adam Newcomb. The quiet cowboy who'd been working her father's small ranch these past 3 months. She'd barely exchanged more than pleasantries with him, though she'd noticed his handsome face, the way the other cowboys deferred to him despite his youth. "How do you know it's Grayson?" she whispered, as screams and more shots erupted from the street. "Because I've been expecting them." His jaw tightened as he peered over the table. At 26, Adam had the weathered look of a man who'd seen far more than his years should allow. Been watching their movements for weeks. "Your father was warned." Zadie felt the words like another bullet. Warned about what? But there was no time for answers. Adam's hand found hers. "We need to move now." Later, Zadie would remember little of their escape from the saloon. Only fragments remained clear. Crawling across broken glass, the back of Adam's leather vest as he led her through the kitchen, the cool night air when they finally emerged into the alley. The distant shouts of men still hunting. The way Adam's hand never left hers, even when they reached the horses tethered behind the general store. "Can you ride?" he asked, already untying a dappled gray mare. "Better than you," she replied automatically, a flash of her old spirit returning despite the hollow ache spreading through her chest. The ghost of a smile crossed his lips. "We'll see. Follow me and stay close. Don't look back at the town." But she did look back, of course. As they galloped away from Coulter's Creek, Zadie turned to see flames beginning to lick at the edge of town. Her entire world, the saloon where her father had played piano these past 5 years, the small room above it where they'd lived, the friends and neighbors, all of it reduced to a flickering orange glow against the Montana night. She wondered if anyone had moved her father's body, if anyone would bury him properly. Adam led them hard through the night, following trails only he seemed to see in the darkness. They rode for hours, the rhythm of hoofbeats matching the pounding of Zadie's heart. Only when the eastern sky began to lighten did he finally slow, guiding them into a stand of pines beside a small creek. "We'll rest the horses," he said, dismounting in a fluid motion, "and you need to eat something." Zadie slid from her saddle but remained standing, one hand on the mare's warm neck for support. Now that they'd stopped moving, the reality of what had happened crashed over her. Her father was dead, her home gone. And she was alone in the wilderness with a man she barely knew. "Why did they kill him?" she asked, her voice raw. "My father never harmed anyone." Adam was checking his horse's legs, his movements efficient. "Because of the deed," he said simply. "What deed?" "To your ranch," he straightened, fixing her with that storm cloud gaze. "Your father bought land that Grayson believes belongs to him, the old boundaries from before the war. He's been forcing out small ranchers all across the territory. But we've had that land for 5 years. Grayson doesn't care about paper deeds or territorial law." Adam pulled a canteen from his saddlebag and offered it to her. He only understands force. Zadie ignored the water. And how do you know so much about Everett Grayson? Something dangerous flickered across Adam's face. Because I've been tracking him and his operation for 8 months. Your father hired me knowing what I was, not just a ranch hand. He paused. I'm a Pinkerton agent, Miss Newell. The revelation hit her like a physical blow. A detective, then you were using us as bait. No, he said sharply. I was protecting your father while gathering evidence, but Grayson moved faster than I anticipated. Zadie felt her knees weaken. She sank to the ground, her green dress pooling around her. Your father was a good man, Adam said more gently, crouching beside her. He knew the risks. He wanted to stand up to Grayson to help build a case against him. And now he's dead, her voice broke on the last word, yes. And I failed him. The simple admission carried a weight that suggested it wasn't the first time Adam Newcomb had failed someone. When Zadie looked up at him through tears, she saw something in his eyes that mirrored the emptiness spreading inside her. A familiar pain, carefully controlled but never truly gone. In that moment she recognized him not as the quiet ranch hand or even the detective, but as someone who understood loss. What happens now? She asked. I get you somewhere safe. Then I finish what your father and I started. You mean bring Grayson to justice? Adam's expression hardened. I mean I stop him permanently. Then I'm coming with you, Zadie said, surprising herself with the steel in her voice. A bitter laugh escaped him. No, you're not. I work alone, Miss Newell. Always have, always will. My father died for this cause. That makes it my fight too. This isn't some romantic adventure, Adam snapped. This is blood and dirt and cruelty. The frontier doesn't forgive mistakes, and neither do men like Grayson. I've lived in Montana territory since I was 17, she countered. I know what the frontier is. And that ranch is all I have left. And you'll get it back, he said, standing abruptly. But not by getting yourself killed. The best thing you can do is stay out of my way. Zadie rose too, facing him with her chin lifted. I don't need your protection, Mr. Newcomb. I need your help. There's a difference. His eyes narrowed. The difference won't matter to Grayson's men when they put a bullet in your head. Then teach me what I need to know to survive them. Adam studied her for a long moment, taking in her tear-stained face, the determined set of her jaw, the steel beneath the grief in her green eyes. For the first time he seemed to truly see her, not as his employer's daughter or a burden to be protected, but as someone with a will that might match his own. You'll slow me down, he said finally, but the conviction was fading from his voice. Maybe, she conceded, or maybe I'll help you succeed where you've been failing for 8 months. His expression darkened at the implied criticism, but before he could respond, the sound of distant hoofbeats reached them. Adam tensed, hand dropping to the revolver at his hip. They've followed our trail, he muttered, then fixed Zadie with a hard stare. If you're coming with me, you follow my orders without question. Starting now, get on your horse. They rode hard through the morning, taking routes that seemed designed to confuse anyone tracking them, crossing streams, doubling back, cutting through dense pine forests where branches whipped at Zadie's face. The beautiful dress she'd worn to town the previous day, the day her life had shattered, was torn and dirty now, but she barely noticed. By midday, they'd climbed into rockier country, and Adam finally seemed satisfied they'd lost their pursuers. He led them to a small cabin tucked into a narrow valley, so well hidden among the pines that Zadie wouldn't have seen it if he hadn't pointed it out. What is this place? She asked as they dismounted. Safe house. Built it myself last winter when I realized this investigation would take longer than expected. He led the horses to a lean-to shelter beside the cabin. No one knows about it. The cabin's interior was Spartan but serviceable. A stone fireplace, rough wooden table with 2 chairs, narrow bed pushed against one wall, shelves stocked with provisions. A rifle stood in the corner alongside a shotgun. You can have the bed, Adam said, removing his hat and running a hand through dark hair that curled slightly at the ends. Without the hat shadowing his features, she could see more clearly how young he actually was, perhaps 26 or 27, though his eyes belonged to a much older man. "I need to check the perimeter," he continued. "Rest if you can, there's food in that cupboard." After he left, Zadie stood in the center of the small space, suddenly overwhelmed. Her father was dead, her home gone. And here she was, miles from anywhere, with a man who lived behind walls as solid as the mountains surrounding them. She moved to the small window, watching as Adam checked the surroundings with the methodical precision that seemed to characterize everything he did. Even from this distance, she could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hand never strayed far from his gun. What had made him this way? This man who claimed to work for justice but moved like someone hunted. Who spoke of stopping Grayson with a coldness that suggested he'd done such things before. Adam Newcomb was clearly dangerous. But as Zadie watched him scan the ridgeline with those storm-gray eyes, she realized he represented her only chance at justice and survival. "I will not be a victim," she whispered to herself, a promise and a prayer. "I will not break." But even as she said the words, she felt something inside her already cracking. When Adam returned, he found her sitting at the table, her torn dress replaced with a pair of canvas trousers and a flannel shirt she'd found in a trunk, both several sizes too large but cinched with a belt. "Hope you don't mind," she said, nodding toward the clothes. "Mine were ruined." His eyes widened slightly. "They suit you better than I'd have guessed." "My father raised me practical, Mr. Newcomb. I can ride and shoot and mend fences when needed. The dress was for town appearances." He nodded slowly, some of the tension leaving his stance. "If we're going to be partners in this, you should call me Adam." "Partners?" She raised an eyebrow. "This morning you were determined to abandon me at the nearest safe town. This morning I didn't know Grayson would have 30 men combing these hills for us." He pulled out the other chair and sat, laying his revolver on the table. "Plans change, and I've been thinking about what you said." "Which part?" "About me failing for 8 months. A muscle ticked in his jaw. "You're right. My usual methods haven't worked against Grayson. Maybe I need something different." "And I'm different." "You're the daughter of one of his victims. You have a legal claim to land he wants. And you have something most people around here lost a long time ago." "What's that?" "Righteous anger." His eyes met hers across the table. "I've seen plenty of people with a taste for vengeance, but clean, honest fury at injustice. That's rare out here." Zadie wasn't sure if she should take his words as a compliment or a warning. "And what do you have, Adam?" The question seemed to catch him off guard. He looked down at his hands, strong, capable hands with the calluses of a working man, not the soft palms of an office-bound detective. "Determination," he finally said. "And enough ghosts to know I can't afford to make more." The confession, oblique as it was, seemed to cost him. Zadie sensed that Adam Newcomb didn't often reveal even this much of himself. "So what's the plan?" she asked, steering toward safer ground. "First, we gather information. Grayson has a network: suppliers, corrupt officials, hired guns. We need to understand how it all connects." He ran a hand through his hair. "I've been focusing too much on Grayson himself. But he's careful, never dirties his own hands. We need to dismantle what he's built piece by piece. And my ranch. For now, he'll think you died in town. That gives us an advantage. But eventually, we'll need to establish your claim publicly. You think the law will help, after what happened to my father?" "Some of it's compromised, but not all." Adam leaned forward. "That's where you come in. Your father was respected. People will listen to his daughter when they wouldn't listen to a stranger like me." Zadie considered this. "You want to use me as the public face of your investigation." "I want us to work together," he corrected. "But first, I need to know you can protect yourself. Starting tomorrow, I'll teach you what you need to know. I already told you I can shoot." "Shooting at tin cans is different from shooting at men," he said quietly. "And there's more to staying alive than just pulling a trigger. You need to learn to move, to watch, to think like someone who expects danger around every corner." "Like you do," she observed. Something flashed in his eyes, recognition, perhaps, that she saw more than he intended to show. Yes. Like I do. That night, despite her exhaustion, Zadie lay awake on the narrow bed, listening to Adam's steady breathing from his bedroll near the fireplace. Her mind raced with images of her father falling, of flames consuming the town, of the future she'd thought she had, managing the small ranch, perhaps eventually marrying one of the local men, building a life in the growing territory. All of it gone now, replaced by this strange new reality where she wore men's clothing and plotted justice, alongside a detective who seemed as damaged as the frontier itself. "I know you're awake," Adam's voice came softly through the darkness. Zadie turned toward the sound. "How could you tell?" "Your breathing, it changes when people are truly asleep." A log shifted in the fireplace, sending up a spray of sparks that briefly illuminated his profile. "The grief will ease eventually, not disappear but change shape." The simple acknowledgement of her pain loosened something in her chest. "You sound like you know." Silence stretched between them before he answered, "My family. 6 years ago, homestead in Wyoming." Zadie waited, sensing there was more to the story, but Adam offered nothing further. Even this small confidence seemed to have cost him. "I'm sorry," she said finally. "Don't be. It's what made me who I am, what I do now." "Is that why you became a Pinkerton?" A humorless chuckle. "In a way, turns out hunting men requires skills I already had, and a certain disregard for personal safety." "Is that what you think this is for me, a death wish?" The bedroll rustled as he shifted. "Isn't it, at least a little?" Zadie considered the question honestly. "No," she said finally, "I want to live. But I want to live in a world where men like Grayson answer for what they've done, where my father's death means something." Justice then, his voice held a note of respect. "That's better than vengeance, cleaner." "What about you, Adam? Is it justice you want or something else?" The silence that followed told her she'd ventured too far. When he finally spoke, his voice had returned to the professional tone she'd first known. "Get some sleep, Miss Newell. Training starts at dawn." True to his word, Adam woke her before the sun breached the eastern mountains. The day began with a brutal regimen of physical preparation, running the steep trails around the cabin, learning to move silently through underbrush, practicing falls that wouldn't result in broken bones. "Your best advantage is that no one expects you to be dangerous," he explained as they paused for water beside a stream. "A young woman in this territory, they'll underestimate you. We can use that." "Is that why you initially dismissed me?" she asked, wiping sweat from her brow. "Because I'm a woman?" Adam's expression tightened. "I dismissed you because I work alone. It's safer that way." "Safer for whom?" "For everyone," he stood abruptly. "Next, we practice shooting, not just hitting targets but drawing quickly, firing from different positions. In a real fight, you rarely have time to take perfect aim." Over the following days, their routine settled into a pattern. Mornings were for physical training, afternoons for weapons practice and tactics. Evenings, they would discuss Grayson's operation. Everything Adam had learned in 8 months of investigation, augmented by what Zadie knew about local ranchers, business deals, and the gossip that had flowed freely in her father's saloon. "Grayson has the territorial governor in his pocket," Adam explained one night as they sat at the table, a rough map of the region spread between them. "That's why legal challenges against him mysteriously disappear. But he's been making enemies. Not everyone can be bought." "Like Judge Carlton," Zadie suggested. "He stood up to Grayson last spring over water rights." Adam nodded. "And he's still alive, which means Grayson fears him, or at least the attention killing him would bring. So we need allies like the judge. We need evidence first, proof of Grayson's methods, his network, the bribes, the intimidation. Something solid enough that even his friends in high places can't ignore it." Zadie studied the map, her finger tracing the boundaries of her father's ranch. "What about here? Grayson wanted our land badly enough to kill for it." "There must be a reason." Adam leaned closer, their shoulders nearly touching as he followed her gesture. The location is strategic, controls access to the valley, good water supply. But there must be more to it. My father mentioned something about survey markers being moved. He thought someone was trying to redraw the property lines. Adam's eyes lit with interest. When was this? About 2 months ago. He didn't make much of it at the time. That's it, Adam's finger tapped the map decisively. Grayson isn't just taking land, he's redefining boundaries, probably related to the coming railroad. How would moving property lines help him with the railroad? If he controls certain key parcels, he can essentially dictate where the tracks go. And whoever controls the railroad's path controls the future of this entire territory. Adam straightened, excitement visible beneath his usual reserve. We need to check those survey markers. That means going back to the ranch, Zadie said, both dread and determination coloring her voice. Yes, and it will be dangerous. He studied her face. Are you ready for that? After nearly 2 weeks of training, Zadie had developed muscles she never knew existed. Her hands were calloused from firearms practice, her skin weathered from hours in the mountain sun. But the physical changes were nothing compared to the transformation happening inside her, grief hardening into purpose, fear giving way to focused resolve. I'm ready, she said, meeting his gaze without flinching. Something changed in Adam's eyes as he looked at her, a shift from professional assessment to something more complex. For a brief moment, the walls he maintained so carefully seemed to thin. We'll leave tomorrow night, he said, his voice slightly rougher than usual. Travel under darkness, but first there's one more skill you need to learn. What's that? How to get out of restraints. If you're ever captured, it could save your life. The lesson that followed was intensely physical, Adam showing her how to position her hands when being tied, how to create slack in ropes, how to slip free of poorly secured bindings. The proximity it required broke through the careful distance they'd maintained during their other training sessions. Flex your wrists like this when they're binding you, he demonstrated, his fingers circling her wrists, warm and steady. Create space they can't see. Zadie tried to focus on the instructions rather than the sensation of his touch or the clean male scent of him as he leaned close to check her technique. There had been a strange tension building between them over the past days, moments when their eyes would meet a second too long, when a casual contact during training would linger. She attributed it to their isolation, to the intensity of their shared purpose, nothing more. But that night, as they made final preparations for the journey ahead, Zadie caught Adam watching her with an expression that had nothing to do with tactical assessment. What? She asked, suddenly self-conscious. He shook his head slightly. Just thinking about how different you are from 2 weeks ago. Good different or bad different? Just different, he turned back to checking his gear. The woman I met in that saloon wouldn't recognize you now. She barely knew herself then, Zadie replied softly. Loss has a way of stripping things down to what matters. Adam's hands stilled. Yes, he agreed, looking up at her with those storm cloud eyes, it does. For a moment, something electric hung between them, a recognition of shared understanding that went beyond their partnership of necessity. Then Adam cleared his throat and returned to his preparations. Get some rest, he said, the professional mask firmly back in place. Tomorrow we'll test everything I've taught you. They left the cabin well after sunset, traveling light and fast through moonlit forests. Adam led them on a circuitous route, avoiding the main trails where Grayson's men might patrol. By dawn, they'd covered nearly 20 miles, and the familiar landscape of the Newell ranch came into view from their position on a wooded ridge. Smoke, Adam observed, pointing to a thin gray line rising from the ranch house chimney. They've got someone stationed there. Zadie felt a surge of anger at the thought of strangers occupying her home. How many do you think? Can't tell from here, we'll need to get closer. He handed her the spyglass he carried. But first, let's locate those survey markers you mentioned. They spent the morning carefully scouting the property's boundaries, keeping to cover whenever possible. Adam's training proved invaluable as Zadie learned to move as he did, patiently, deliberately, with constant awareness of sightlines and potential observers. By midday, they'd found what they were looking for. A series of recently placed survey stakes forming a boundary line that cut through the heart of the Newell property, effectively claiming the most valuable portions for whoever had placed them. "These aren't territorial survey marks," Adam said, crouching to examine one of the stakes. "These were placed privately. See the insignia." Zadie leaned closer. A small brand had been burned into the wood, GLC. "Grayson Land Company," she murmured. "He's literally staking his claim." "And rewriting the maps to support it." Adam stood, scanning the horizon. "This is what your father discovered. Grayson is falsifying surveys across the region, creating legal documentation for his land grabs." "But that's not enough to bring him down, is it?" "He could claim it was a legitimate dispute over boundaries." "True, but it's a start." Adam pointed west. "We need to check the other side of your property. I'm betting we'll find more of these, creating a corridor that exactly matches what the railroad would need." As they made their way across the ranch land, staying within the tree line whenever possible, Zadie was struck by how differently she now saw the familiar landscape. What had once been simply home was now terrain to be analyzed for tactical advantage, for lines of sight, for potential threats. "There," Adam said suddenly, dropping to a crouch and pulling her down beside him. Through a break in the trees, they could see two riders approaching the ranch house, men in dusty clothes with rifles slung across their saddles. "Grayson's men," Zadie whispered. Adam nodded, "probably reporting in." "Which means there's someone important at the house." They watched as the men dismounted and entered the building. When they emerged 10 minutes later, they were accompanied by a third figure, tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a fine black coat despite the summer heat. "Is that him?" Zadie asked, heart hammering against her ribs. "Grayson." No, Adam's voice had gone cold. "That's Mac Durham, Grayson's enforcer." "The one who," she couldn't finish the sentence. "The one who likely gave the order to kill your father." Adam's hand moved to cover hers where it gripped the earth beneath them. "Steady now, we've got what we came for today." But Zadie barely heard him. All she could see was the man responsible for her father's death, standing on her porch, giving orders on her land. Without conscious thought, her hand moved to the revolver at her hip. Adam's fingers tightened over hers. "Not like this," he said, his voice low but intense. "He's not alone, and there are probably more men inside." "You wouldn't make it 10 feet. "I could hit him from here," she whispered. "You taught me to shoot at this distance." "And then what? Die in a hail of bullets?" He turned her face toward his, forcing her to meet his eyes. "That's not justice, Zadie, that's suicide." The use of her first name, something he'd carefully avoided until now, broke through her rage-induced focus. "We do this right," he continued, holding her gaze. "We bring down Grayson and all his men, Durham included. Your father deserves that kind of justice." Slowly the red haze receded from Zadie's vision. She nodded once, releasing her grip on the gun. "Let's go," Adam said, relief evident in his voice. "We've seen enough for today." They retreated through the forest, making a wide circle to avoid being spotted. The journey back to the cabin was made in tense silence, each lost in their own thoughts. It wasn't until they were safely inside, the door barred behind them, that Zadie finally spoke. "I'm sorry," she said, sinking into a chair. "I almost ruined everything." Adam said about building a fire, his movements precise. "You reacted like anyone would. Seeing the man who killed your father standing on your land, it would test anyone's control. But not yours." His hand stilled momentarily. "My control was tested long ago. What you saw today was just the result of that testing." Something in his tone made her look up sharply. "When you lost your family." Adam didn't answer immediately. He finished lighting the fire, watched the small flames catch and grow before he finally turned to face her. "My wife and son died because I acted rashly," he said, each word measured and heavy, "because I put vengeance above strategy. I won't make that mistake again." The revelation hung in the air between them. Adam married, a father, these aspects of him she had never imagined. The loss that had shaped him suddenly had form, dimension. "I didn't know," she said softly. "No one does, not anymore." He moved to the cupboard, took down 2 tin cups. "That life is gone, buried along with them." "Is that why you became a Pinkerton? To bury Adam Newcomb, the husband and father?" A humorless smile crossed his face as he poured whiskey into the cups. "Perceptive Miss Newell." He handed her one of the cups. "Yes, the man who had a family, who believed in building something good, he died in Wyoming. The man who hunts people like Grayson was born in his place." Zadie accepted the whiskey, studying Adam's face in the firelight. The pain she saw there was carefully controlled but unmistakable. "And you think that's what your wife would have wanted, for you to become this?" His eyes flashed with momentary anger. "What Margaret would have wanted doesn't matter anymore. She's gone. Our son is gone. All that matters now is making men like Grayson pay for what they do." "Is that really all that matters?" Zadie challenged gently. "Living only for justice? Or is it just easier than risking care for anything, or anyone, again?" Adam stared at her, surprise and something like recognition crossing his features. Then he downed his whiskey in a single swallow and set the cup aside. "We should rest," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "Tomorrow we need to plan our next move." But that night, long after Adam had settled onto his bedroll, Zadie lay awake thinking about the man sleeping across the small cabin. The man who had lost everything and remade himself into a weapon. The man who had saved her life, trained her, and now stood between her and the self-destruction of blind vengeance. A man who, despite his carefully constructed walls, had shown her glimpses of someone capable of deep feeling, someone who might once have known how to love. The realization brought with it a startling clarity. Somewhere in these past weeks, amid grief and training and shared purpose, she had begun to care for Adam Newcomb. Not just as her protector or partner in justice, but as a man. The thought should have frightened her. Instead, it settled into her consciousness with the weight of inevitable truth. Morning brought a shift in their circumstances. Adam returned from checking their perimeter with tension evident in every line of his body. "Riders," he said curtly, gathering their few essential supplies. "Half a mile east and moving this way. We need to leave, now." They abandoned the cabin with practiced efficiency, taking only what they could carry on horseback. Adam led them up a steep game trail that wound into higher country, where the forests grew denser and the terrain more challenging for pursuers. "Did they find us, or is it just bad luck?" Zadie asked when they finally paused to rest the horses. "Can't be sure." Adam scanned the valley below. "But they're being methodical, searching in a grid pattern. I think Grayson knows we're alive and in the area." "How could he know that?" "The ranch. We must have left some sign of our presence." He shook his head. "I was careless." "What now?" "We need a new safe house, and we need to accelerate our plans." Adam turned to her, his expression grave. "We have enough evidence about the survey stakes to start building our case. But we need more, documents linking Grayson to the falsified surveys, proof of bribery, witnesses willing to testify about intimidation." "Where would we find such things?" "Grayson's main ranch." "His office." Adam's eyes held a glint of determination. "It's time to take the fight directly to him." "You want to break into Everett Grayson's headquarters?" Zadie asked incredulously. "That's suicide." "Not if we're smart about it." Adam swung back into his saddle. "But first we need somewhere secure to plan. I know a place not far from here." The place proved to be a small line shack belonging to a rancher named McAllister, one of the few in the area who had successfully resisted Grayson's expansion. "Sam owes me a favor," Adam explained as they approached the weathered cabin. "He's away driving cattle to the railroad, so we'll have the place to ourselves. It's not as remote as our cabin, but Grayson wouldn't dare move against McAllister openly. Too many allies." The shack was basic, a single room with a stone fireplace, narrow cot, and rough table. But it offered shelter and a strategic position overlooking a stretch of valley that would make it difficult for anyone to approach undetected. Over the next 3 days, they developed their plan. Adam sketched layouts of Grayson's ranch based on his previous reconnaissance, identified patrol patterns of his men, and outlined the most likely locations of incriminating documents. "The key is timing," he explained, pointing to his rough map. "Grayson hosts a gathering every month for the ranchers and businessmen he's trying to influence, this Saturday. The house will be full of people, which means confusion we can use to our advantage." "You want to go in during a party?" Zadie asked skeptically, exactly when they'd least expect it. Adam's eyes held a gleam of anticipation. "You'll attend as a guest." "What, how?" With this, he reached into his saddlebag and produced a cream-colored envelope. An invitation. "Belonged to a land speculator who had an unfortunate encounter with me last week while I was scouting Grayson's property. He won't be using it." Zadie took the envelope, examining the elegant script. "Mr. James Harrington and guest," she read. "I'm to be your guest." "No, you'll be Mrs. Harrington. I'll find another way in." "Why the separation? I thought we were partners now." "We are, but you can move freely through a social gathering in a way I can't. Women notice different things, have access to different spaces." "And what exactly am I looking for at this party?" "Information, conversations, connections." Adam leaned forward. "While I search Grayson's office, you'll be our eyes and ears in the gathering. Learn who his allies are, who seems uncomfortable with him, who might be pressured to turn against him." Zadie considered the plan. "I'll need appropriate clothing." "Mrs. Harrington wouldn't attend in men's trousers." "Already arranged. There's a dress being prepared in Millerton. We'll collect it tomorrow." She raised an eyebrow. "You've thought of everything." "Planning keeps people alive, Miss Newell." But there was a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Besides, I suspect you'll be quite convincing as a society wife. You have a natural dignity." The compliment, unexpected from the usually reserved Adam, brought color to Zadie's cheeks. "And what about you? How will you enter undetected?" "Service entrance. The party will require extra staff. In the right clothes, with the right attitude, I can blend in." His eyes met hers. "The trick is confidence. Act like you belong, and most people will assume you do." The journey to Millerton the next day marked their first venture into a town since fleeing Coulter's Creek. Despite the risk, they needed supplies, information, and the promised dress for Zadie's role in their plan. Adam insisted they enter separately. "Less memorable that way," he explained. "I'll collect the dress from the seamstress. You visit the general store for our other supplies. We'll meet at the livery stable in 2 hours." Zadie felt strangely vulnerable as she rode into town alone, dressed in her borrowed men's clothing with her hair tucked beneath a wide-brimmed hat. But the busy streets of Millerton proved an effective cover. No one spared her more than a passing glance as she moved from the general store to the post office, gathering both supplies and local gossip. It was in the post office that she overheard a conversation that chilled her blood. "Shame about the Newell girl," an older woman was saying to the postmaster. "Found her body yesterday, according to my nephew on the search party. Up in Parker's Ridge. Mountain lions got to her first, they think." "Tragic," the postmaster agreed. "First her father in that saloon shooting, now her. Least she's at peace now." Zadie froze, momentarily forgetting to breathe. They believed she was dead. Someone had found a body and identified it as hers. She completed her purchase in a daze, careful to keep her face shadowed by her hat, and hurried toward the livery stable ahead of schedule. Adam was already there, a wrapped package under his arm. "We need to leave," she said without preamble. "Now." His eyes narrowed at her tone. "What happened?" "Not here," she whispered, acutely aware of the stable boy cleaning tack nearby. They rode out of town at a measured pace that betrayed none of their internal urgency. Only when they were well beyond the town limits did Adam guide them off the road and into a small copse of trees. "What did you hear?" he asked, dismounting. Zadie slid from her horse, legs shaky with the implications of what she'd learned. "They think I'm dead. A search party found a body in Parker's Ridge. They've identified it as mine." Adam's expression sharpened. "Grayson," he said flatly. "He's covering his tracks. making it seem like you were killed by natural causes, not murdered on his orders. But whose body did they find? Someone of similar age and build, I'd guess, possibly another of his victims. Adam's jaw tightened. This changes things. How doesn't it give us an advantage if they think I'm dead? Yes and no. It means Grayson believes he's eliminated a witness and legitimate claimant to your father's land. But it also means he'll be moving faster now to solidify his hold on the area. Adam untied the package containing the dress. However, it does make our plan for the gathering more viable. No one will be looking for a dead woman. The dress was elegant but restrained, deep blue silk with modest trim, suitable for a land speculator's wife of good but not ostentatious means. Along with it came appropriate underpinnings, gloves, and even a small hat with a delicate veil. How did you arrange all this? Zadie asked, running her fingers over the fine fabric. Connections, Adam replied vaguely. The Pinkertons maintain resources for undercover work. They returned to McAllister's lined shack with their supplies, and spent the evening refining their plan for Grayson's gathering. The news of Zadie's death added both urgency and opportunity to their strategy. We'll leave for Grayson's ranch tomorrow afternoon, Adam decided. The party begins at 7. I'll enter through the service area an hour earlier. You'll arrive at 7:30, fashionably late but not conspicuously so. And if Grayson himself recognizes me? Unlikely. You met him, once, 2 years ago at a county fair. When she nodded, he continued, you'll look entirely different in that dress with your hair styled. Besides, the veil will provide some concealment until you're comfortable. As night fell, a storm rolled in from the mountains, bringing pounding rain that drummed against the lined shack's roof. The close quarters seemed even more intimate with the world beyond, reduced to shadow and sound. Adam sat at the table, meticulously cleaning his revolver by the light of a single lantern. Zadie watched him from her seat by the fire, struck by how the golden light softened his features, revealing the handsome young man beneath the hard-edged detective. What will you do after Grayson? She asked suddenly. After this is finished. His hands paused momentarily. There's always another Grayson, another case. Is that really what you want, a life of endless hunting? Adam reassembled his gun with efficient movements. Want doesn't enter into it, Miss Newell. It's what I'm good at, what needs doing. There are other things you might be good at, she suggested, things that don't require you to live like a ghost. He holstered the weapon and finally looked up at her. Why does it matter to you what I do after this case? It was a fair question, one Zadie wasn't entirely sure how to answer. Why did it matter what path this solitary man chose once their business was concluded? Why did the thought of him continuing his lonely existence create an ache in her chest? Because, she began slowly, I think there's more to you than the man you've allowed yourself to become. And I think somewhere inside, you know that too. Adam held her gaze for a long moment, something vulnerable flickering behind his eyes. Then he stood abruptly. We should rest, he said, his voice carefully controlled. Tomorrow will require all our focus. But as Zadie settled onto the narrow cot, leaving Adam his usual place by the fire, she caught him watching her with an expression that suggested her words had reached some place he'd long kept guarded. Morning brought clearing skies and heightened tension as they made final preparations. Adam was all business, reviewing details of the plan, contingencies, emergency signals. If Zadie's observations the previous night had affected him, he showed no sign of it. By afternoon, she had transformed herself with the help of the blue silk dress, arranging her chestnut hair in an elegant twist at the nape of her neck. The woman who looked back from McAllister's small shaving mirror bore little resemblance to either the saloon owner's daughter from Coulter's Creek or the determined student in men's clothing who had been training in the wilderness. Mrs. James Harrington, she murmured to her reflection, practicing the slight Eastern accent she and Adam had agreed upon for her character. Pleased to make your acquaintance. When she emerged from behind the makeshift screen they'd arranged for privacy, Adam's reaction made all the effort worthwhile. He stared, momentarily forgetting the map he'd been studying. "Will I do?" she asked, smoothing the silk over her hips. Adam cleared his throat. "You'll more than do, Miss Newell, you look." He seemed to search for an appropriate word. "Transformed." "That's the idea, isn't it?" she said, pleased despite herself at his obvious appreciation. He nodded, recovering his professional demeanor. "Remember, your goal is information gathering. Circulate, listen more than you speak. If anyone asks too many questions about Harrington's business, mention the potential railroad contracts. That should divert their attention. And if I'm discovered, make your way to the East Terrace. I'll be watching for signals there between my own movements." They left the line shack separately, Adam first, dressed in the plain dark clothing of a servant, leading a pack horse with Zadie's dress trunk. Zadie following an hour later, now fully in character as Mrs. Harrington, riding side saddle on a horse borrowed from McAllister's stable. Grayson's ranch sprawled across a valley some 15 miles from Millerton, its main house an imposing structure of stone and timber that reflected its owner's ambitions. As Zadie approached along the tree-lined drive, lanterns were already being lit against the gathering dusk, casting golden pools of light that guided arriving guests. She surrendered her horse to a waiting stable hand and ascended the broad steps to the main entrance, where a butler requested her invitation. Heart pounding beneath her composed exterior, Zadie presented the cream envelope. "Mrs. James Harrington," she announced with just the right note of cultured confidence. "My husband sends his regrets business in Helena detained him." The butler examined the invitation briefly. "Of course, Mrs. Harrington, Mr. Grayson will be pleased you could attend." And just like that, she was inside the lion's den, moving through rooms filled with the powerful men who controlled the territory's future and the women who influenced them. Crystal glasses clinked, expensive perfume mingled with cigar smoke, and beneath the civility of it all, Zadie could sense the currents of ambition and calculation. She accepted a glass of champagne from a passing servant, not Adam, and began to circulate, employing the techniques he had taught her for gathering information while appearing merely social. "The railroad contracts are all anyone can discuss these days," she mentioned to a banker's wife, who eagerly shared gossip about which ranchers were leveraged too heavily in anticipation of the coming boom. "Poor Thomas McKendrick," the woman confided, "borrowed against his entire spread based on Grayson's assurances about the rail line's path. Now they say the survey's been changed and he'll be 5 miles from the nearest station." Zadie made appropriate noises of sympathy while filing away the information. Manipulation of the railroad surveys, further evidence of Grayson's methods. She worked her way through the gathering, building a mental map of alliances and tensions. Judge Carleton was present, she noted with interest, maintaining a cool distance from Grayson himself. A potential ally, as Adam had suggested. It was nearly 9 o'clock when she finally came face to face with her host. Everett Grayson was a large man in his 50s, expensively dressed, with the ruddy complexion of someone who spent more time commanding outdoors than working in it. His smile didn't reach his eyes as he greeted her. "Mrs. Harrington," he said, taking her gloved hand. "Welcome to my home. I don't believe I've had the pleasure before." "No, sir," Zadie replied, forcing herself to meet his gaze while remembering her father's blood spreading across saloon floorboards. "My husband and I recently relocated from Denver. James is quite interested in the opportunities your growing territory presents." "Is he indeed?" Grayson's eyes narrowed slightly. "And what sort of opportunities interest Mr. Harrington?" "Land development, primarily, particularly areas likely to benefit from the coming railroad." Grayson studied her with more attention. "Your husband shows good instinct, though such investments require careful local guidance. Many newcomers find themselves misled about which parcels will prove valuable. I'm sure James would appreciate your insights, Mr. Grayson. He always says connections matter more than maps in frontier development." A wise perspective. Grayson seemed to relax slightly. "Perhaps you'll do me the honor of a dance later, Mrs. Harrington. We could discuss how I might assist your husband's ambitions." "I would be delighted," Zadie replied, suppressing a shudder at the thought of being held by the man responsible for her father's death. As Grayson moved on to other guests, Zadie caught a glimpse of Adam moving through the room with a tray of empty glasses. Their eyes met briefly, a silent confirmation that all was proceeding as planned. He would be making his way toward Grayson's office soon, while the gathering provided cover. Zadie continued her circuit of the room, gathering fragments of conversation that might prove useful. She was speaking with the territorial surveyor's wife when a disturbance near the entrance hall caught her attention. A man had arrived, tall, dark-haired, with an imposing presence that caused conversations to falter as he moved through the crowd. It took Zadie a moment to recognize him without his black coat, Mac Durham, Grayson's enforcer, the man she had nearly shot at her ranch. Durham spoke briefly to Grayson, whose expression darkened. Both men glanced around the room, their manner suddenly alert, predatory. Something had gone wrong. Zadie maintained her composure with effort, excusing herself from her conversation and drifting casually toward the East Terrace doors. She needed to warn Adam. She had nearly reached the terrace when a heavy hand fell on her arm. She turned to find Durham himself, his grip just short of painful. "Mrs. Harrington, isn't it?" he said, his voice deceptively soft. "Mr. Grayson would like a private word in his study." Zadie's heart hammered against her ribs. How flattering, though I wonder what could be so urgent it cannot wait until our promised dance. Durham's smile didn't reach his eyes. "It concerns your husband's interests, most particularly his identity." His fingers tightened. "This way, please." With Durham's hand firmly guiding her, Zadie had no choice but to accompany him through the crowd, maintaining her composed expression through sheer willpower. They moved down a hallway, away from the main gathering, toward what must be Grayson's private quarters, and presumably toward Adam. Durham opened a heavy oak door and ushered her into a spacious office dominated by a massive desk. Grayson was already there along with two of his men, and between them Adam, his hands bound behind him, a bleeding cut above his eye. "Ah, Mrs. Harrington," Grayson said, his previous civility replaced with cold satisfaction. "Or should I say, Miss Newell, reports of your death appear to have been exaggerated." Zadie lifted her chin, abandoning the pretense. "Unlike reports of your criminality, which seem entirely accurate." Grayson laughed without humor. "Spirit, just like your father." He moved around the desk. He had the same defiant look right before Durham here put a bullet in him. Beside her, Durham shifted, and Zadie realized with a cold certainty that it had been this man's gun that had shattered her world that night in the saloon. Her eyes met Adam's across the room, reading the warning there: "Don't act rashly, don't give them what they want." "What gave us away?" she asked, buying time, mind racing through the escape options Adam had drilled into her. "Your escort here," Grayson nodded toward Adam. "One of my men recognized him from a previous encounter, a Pinkerton detective working a completely different case last year." "Quite the coincidence." Adam's expression revealed nothing, but Zadie felt a surge of dismay. After all their careful planning, they'd been undone by chance recognition. "So now what?" she demanded. "You kill us both and claim another mountain lion attack." "Eventually," Grayson agreed, "but first you're going to tell me exactly what evidence you've gathered and who you've shared it with." He nodded to one of his men, who moved toward Adam with a knife. "Starting with those survey stakes you were so interested in." Zadie's mind raced. Their evidence was hidden in McAllister's line shack, the maps, the notes connecting Grayson to the falsified surveys. Nothing incriminating was here with them. If they could somehow escape. "The evidence is already with Judge Carlton," she bluffed. "He has everything: the falsified surveys, the witnesses to intimidation, the land records showing your pattern of acquisition around the railroad path." Grayson's eyes narrowed. "You're lying. Carlton was here tonight. If he had such evidence, he wouldn't have come within 10 miles of me." "He came precisely because he has it," Zadie countered. "To observe you one last time before issuing warrants tomorrow." It was a desperate gamble, but she could see uncertainty flicker in Grayson's eyes. Before he could respond, Adam suddenly moved, driving his shoulder into the man beside him despite his bound hands. The distraction was all Zadie needed. With a practiced motion, she reached through the slit in her dress to the small derringer strapped to her thigh, a weapon Adam had insisted she carry. She aimed directly at Grayson. "Don't move," she commanded, her voice steadier than she felt. Durham tensed beside her, but Grayson raised a hand to stop him. "Careful, Durham. It seems the lady has learned new skills since we last saw her." "Untie him," Zadie ordered, gesturing toward Adam with the derringer. "Or what?" Grayson countered. "That little gun has 2 shots at most. There are 4 of us." "True," she acknowledged, "but you'll be the first, and I don't think your men are paid enough to die for you." A tense silence fell. Then Adam spoke, his voice calm despite his position. "It's over, Grayson. Whether you kill us or not, people know what you've been doing. The territorial governor can't protect you from federal charges of mail fraud and interference with railroad surveys." "Mail fraud," Grayson scoffed. "That's the best you can threaten me with." "It was enough for the Weston gang in Colorado," Adam replied. "They're serving 20 years for less than what you've done." Doubt crept into Grayson's expression. Zadie could see him calculating, weighing options. "Even if I let you walk out of here," he said finally, "what's to stop me sending men after you tomorrow, or the next day?" "The same thing that's stopping me from pulling this trigger right now," Zadie answered. "Self-preservation, kill us, and everything we've gathered goes directly to federal marshals. Let us leave, and perhaps we can find a more accommodating arrangement." It was another bluff, but Zadie had learned from Adam that confidence often mattered more than truth in such negotiations. Grayson studied her for a long moment, then laughed, a genuine sound of surprise and reluctant admiration. "You know, Durham," he said to his enforcer, "I think Thaddeus Newell's daughter might have made a better opponent than he ever did." He turned back to Zadie. "Very well, Miss Newell, you and your detective may leave for now. But this conversation isn't finished." "Untie him first," Zadie insisted, the derringer unwavering. Grayson nodded to one of his men, who moved cautiously to cut Adam's bonds. As soon as his hands were free, Adam stepped away, rubbing his wrists. "Our horses," he said, "and we'll need a head start." 1 hour, Grayson offered, then all agreements are void. It wasn't ideal, but it was more than they might have hoped for minutes earlier. Zadie kept the derringer trained on Grayson as she backed toward the door, Adam moving with her. "Durham will escort you to the stables," Grayson said, "to ensure no unfortunate encounters with my other guests." It was a tense, silent walk through back hallways to avoid the party, Durham leading with barely contained anger, Adam and Zadie following close behind. The night air felt like freedom when they finally emerged from the house. At the stables, their horses were brought out, not by stable hands but by more of Grayson's men. The message was clear: they were being watched, their departure controlled. 1 hour, Durham reminded them as they mounted. Then the hunt begins. They rode out at a measured pace, aware of eyes following their departure. Only when they were beyond sight of the ranch did they break into a gallop, pushing their horses hard toward the safety of distance. "Southeast," Adam called over the thunder of hooves. "Not back to McAllister's, they'll expect that." They rode for nearly 2 hours, following game trails and creek beds to obscure their tracks, before Adam finally signaled a halt in a dense stand of cottonwoods beside a small stream. "We need to rest the horses," he said, dismounting stiffly. The cut above his eye had stopped bleeding but left a dark streak down his face. Zadie slid from her saddle, her legs unsteady after the hard ride, the blue silk dress torn and dirty from their escape. The reality of how narrowly they had avoided death began to sink in, bringing with it a delayed rush of fear and exhilaration. "That was close," she managed, her voice shaking slightly. Adam moved to check the horses, his movements betraying his own tension. "Too close. They know who I am now, and they know you're alive." "What happened? How did they catch you?" "Bad luck. One of Grayson's men worked security for a lumber operation in Oregon last year where I was investigating embezzlement. He recognized me serving drinks and raised the alarm." Adam splashed water on his face from the stream, washing away the blood. "By the time I realized I'd been made, they had the office surrounded." Zadie sank down on a fallen log, suddenly exhausted. So what now? All our evidence is still at McAllister's, and Grayson's men will be watching it. Now we change tactics. Adam straightened, his expression hardening. Grayson thinks he has the upper hand, but he's just revealed his greatest weakness. Which is? Fear. He could have killed us both back there, but he didn't, because he believes we have evidence already in safe hands. Adam moved to sit beside her on the log. That's our new approach. Not gathering evidence ourselves, but convincing Grayson that it's too late, that others already have what they need to destroy him. Psychological warfare, Zadie murmured, understanding dawning. Exactly. For the first time since their capture, Adam's tension seemed to ease slightly. And you, Miss Newell, proved remarkably adept at it tonight. That bluff about Judge Carlton was inspired. I was terrified, she admitted. I just said the first thing that came to mind. The best strategies often emerge from desperation. His eyes met hers in the moonlight. You were magnificent, brave in ways I haven't seen since. He stopped, but Zadie heard the unspoken comparison. Since the wife he had lost. I had a good teacher, she said softly. Adam's gaze lingered on her face, something unguarded in his expression. Then, with visible effort, he stood and moved back to the horses. We should keep moving, he said, his tone professional once more. Find shelter before dawn. There's an abandoned trapper's cabin about 10 miles from here where we can regroup. They rode through the night, the blue silk dress becoming increasingly impractical for Zadie as they traversed rough country. By the time they reached the trapper's cabin, little more than a one-room shelter with a sagging roof, the eastern sky was beginning to lighten. The cabin offered basic protection from the elements but little comfort. Adam set about securing the perimeter while Zadie attempted to make the place habitable, sweeping years of dust and debris from the dirt floor, checking for unwelcome animal residents. It's not much, Adam acknowledged when he returned. But it should keep us hidden for a day or two while we develop our new strategy. Zadie had managed to start a small fire in the crude stone fireplace. Its light cast flickering shadows across the cabin's interior, highlighting the exhaustion on Adam's face, the darkening bruise where he'd been struck. You should rest, she said. You've been up for over 24 hours. So have you, he pointed out. Yes, but I wasn't beaten and tied up by Grayson's men. She gestured to the cabin's only furniture, a narrow cot with a straw-filled mattress of dubious cleanliness. Take the bed, I'll keep watch. Adam looked ready to argue but then winced as he rolled his shoulder, revealing the toll the night's events had taken. Wake me in 4 hours, he conceded. Then we'll switch. He stretched out on the cot, not bothering to remove his boots, and closed his eyes. Within minutes his breathing had steadied into sleep. Zadie watched him for a moment, struck by how young he looked in repose. The hard lines of his face softened. It was easy to forget that beneath the Pinkerton agent was a man barely past 26, a man who had already known more loss than most endured in a lifetime. She turned back to the fire, absently fingering a tear in her once elegant dress. The night's events played through her mind in vivid detail, the gathering at Grayson's, the moment of discovery, the tense standoff in his office. How close they had come to failure, to death, yet here they were, alive, changed by the experience certainly, but alive and still capable of fighting back. And something else had changed too, something in the way Adam looked at her when he thought she wouldn't notice. As if he was seeing not just a partner in their quest for justice, but a woman who had somehow begun to matter to him in ways he hadn't anticipated. Or perhaps that was merely her own wishful thinking, born of exhaustion and the intense connection forged by shared danger. Zadie moved to the cabin's single window, peering out at the lightening forest. Whatever happened between them, or didn't happen, would have to wait. First, they had to survive. And to survive, they needed a new plan to bring down Everett Grayson. When Adam woke 4 hours later, he found Zadie still by the window, the torn blue silk replaced with her more practical borrowed trousers and shirt. You should have woken me, he said, sitting up with a slight grimace. You needed the rest more than I did, she replied. Besides, I've been thinking about our next move. Adam moved to join her by the window, accepting the cup of coffee she offered from a small pot she'd prepared over the fire. "And what have you concluded?" "That Grayson is right to be afraid." She turned to face him fully. "Not because we have evidence safely delivered to Judge Carlton, but because we could still get it to him, or to someone even more dangerous to Grayson." "Such as?" "The railroad company itself." Zadie's eyes gleamed with the inspiration that had come during her watch. "Think about it, Grayson's entire plan depends on controlling where the railroad builds its line. But what if the railroad discovered he was manipulating their surveys, falsifying reports about the best routes?" Adam considered this, surprise and approval registering in his expression. "The railroad's lawyers would destroy him. They have more resources than the territorial government and far more motivation to make an example of him." "Exactly, and we know from our time at his party that there's a railroad representative in the area, that man from Chicago who was talking about the Eastern investors." "Bradford," Adam supplied. "William Bradford. He's staying in Millerton for another week, according to what I overheard." So we go to Bradford, show him what we found about the survey stakes, explain Grayson's scheme to control the railroad's path for his own profit. Adam's expression grew thoughtful. "It could work, particularly if we present it as protecting the railroad's interests, not just seeking justice for your father." He took a sip of coffee. "But first, we need to retrieve our evidence from McAllister's." "Which will be watched." "Yes. But perhaps not as carefully as Grayson's ranch." Adam set down his cup. "I'll go after dark, alone." Zadie opened her mouth to protest, but he raised a hand to stop her. "This isn't about protecting you, Miss Newell. It's about practicality. One person can move more quietly than two. And if I'm caught, you remain free to continue the plan." She wanted to argue but recognized the logic in his approach. "Very well, but we prepare together." They spent the day developing their strategy, reviewing what evidence they had hidden at McAllister's, and planning how best to approach Bradford if Adam successfully retrieved their documentation. As the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, Zadie found herself growing increasingly anxious about Adam's impending mission. "You should leave just after full dark," she said, checking his revolver for him. "That gives you the most hours before dawn if something delays you." Adam nodded, watching her hands move over the weapon with practiced ease, hands that weeks earlier had likely never held a gun. "You've become quite proficient with firearms," he observed. "I had proper motivation." She returned the revolver to him, "and an excellent teacher." Their eyes met as he accepted the gun, his fingers brushing hers in a contact that sent warmth spreading up her arm. For a moment neither moved. "Zadie," he began, his voice unexpectedly gentle, "if something happens tonight—" "Don't," she interrupted. "Nothing will happen. You'll retrieve the evidence, return here, and tomorrow we'll proceed with our plan." A small smile touched his lips. "Is that an order, Miss Newell?" "Consider it a prediction from someone who's developing a talent for reading situations." She tried to match his lightness, despite the fear coiling in her stomach. "Besides, you owe me a proper explanation of how to track game. You promised to teach me last week, and we never got to it." "So I did." Adam holstered his revolver. "Very well. I accept your prediction and will plan accordingly." As darkness fell, Zadie watched him prepare with the methodical care that characterized everything he did, checking weapons, selecting only essential equipment, memorizing the map of their location relative to McAllister's line shack. "I'll be back before dawn," he said as he prepared to leave. "If I'm not, wait until midday, then make your way to Millerton. Find Bradford yourself." "I'll see you before dawn," she countered firmly. Adam paused at the door, looking back at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Then, in a movement that seemed to surprise even him, he crossed back to where she stood and gently touched her cheek. "When this is finished," he said quietly, "there are things I should tell you about who I was before, what I hope might still be possible." Before she could respond, he was gone, slipping into the darkness like a shadow. Zadie touched the place where his fingers had rested against her skin, her heart beating a rapid rhythm against her ribs. In those few words, Adam had confirmed what she had begun to suspect, that beneath his carefully maintained reserve, feelings had been developing that matched her own. The night stretched endlessly as she waited. Zadie maintained the small fire, cleaned their few utensils, reorganized their supplies, anything to occupy her hands and mind. But always her thoughts returned to Adam, moving alone through the darkness toward potential danger. When the eastern sky finally began to lighten with the first hint of dawn, and still no sign of his return, the fear she'd been holding at bay surged forward. Something had gone wrong. Adam should have been back by now. She began pacing the small cabin, calculating distances and times. McAllister's was approximately 15 miles away. Even allowing for caution and stealth, the round trip shouldn't have taken more than 8 hours. As the sun breached the horizon, Zadie made a decision. She wouldn't wait until midday as Adam had instructed. If he had been captured or injured, every hour might matter. She would go after him. She was gathering supplies when a sound outside froze her in place, hoofbeats, approaching slowly. She drew her revolver and moved to the window. Relief flooded her as she recognized Adam's dappled gray horse. But the rider slumped in the saddle, one hand pressed against his side, where a dark stain spread across his shirt. Zadie rushed outside as Adam practically fell from the saddle. She caught him, staggering under his weight but managing to support him toward the cabin. "Grayson's men," he gasped as she helped him inside. "Waiting at McAllister's, got the evidence but took a bullet for my trouble." She eased him onto the cot, her hands steady despite her racing heart. "Let me see." Adam winced as she carefully lifted his shirt. The wound was an angry furrow along his left side. The bullet had grazed him rather than penetrating, but it had left a deep, bleeding gash. "Could have been worse," he managed through gritted teeth. "Didn't hit anything vital." "That doesn't mean it can't kill you if it gets infected," Zadie countered, examining the wound with critical care. "I need to clean and bandage it properly." She worked efficiently with their limited supplies, washing the wound with water boiled over the fire, applying a poultice of herbs she'd gathered earlier for just such an emergency, and binding it tightly with strips torn from the cleanest parts of her ruined blue dress. Throughout the process, Adam watched her face, his own drawn with pain but his eyes clear. "You've done this before," he observed. "My father taught me basic doctoring, said it was an essential skill out here where proper physicians are scarce." She secured the final bandage. "That should hold, but you need to rest. No riding for at least a day." "We don't have a day," Adam protested, attempting to sit up. "Grayson will have men searching everywhere once he learns I escaped with the evidence. And you'll be no use to either of us if you collapse from blood loss." Zadie pressed a hand firmly against his shoulder, keeping him on the cot. "Rest, I'll keep watch and make plans for our next move." For once Adam didn't argue. Whether from pain, blood loss, or simple exhaustion, he closed his eyes and soon drifted into a fitful sleep. Zadie retrieved the saddlebags he'd managed to bring with him, finding inside the maps and notes they'd compiled at McAllister's, their precious evidence against Grayson. She spread the materials on the cabin's small table, reviewing what they had. Surveys showing the original railroad route, documentation of the mysteriously moved markers, notes connecting Grayson to intimidation of smaller ranchers along the planned path. It was compelling but still circumstantial. Would it be enough to convince Bradford that Grayson was manipulating the railroad's plans for personal gain? As the day progressed, Adam's condition improved slightly. The wound showed no immediate signs of infection, and rest had restored some of his color. By late afternoon, he was able to sit up and join Zadie at the table to review their evidence. "We need to get this to Bradford as soon as possible," he said, examining the map she'd arranged. "But Grayson will have men watching Millerton, expecting us to make contact." "So we need a different approach," Zadie concluded. "What if Bradford came to us?" Adam raised an eyebrow. "How would you arrange that?" "A message, not directly from us but through someone Bradford would trust, someone respectable." "Judge Carlton," Adam suggested, following her thinking. "He's not compromised, and he has reason to distrust Grayson." Exactly, we send a message to the judge, asking him to bring Bradford to a neutral location. Somewhere we can control the surroundings, ensure it's not a trap. Adam nodded slowly, wincing as the movement pulled at his injured side. It could work, but getting a message to Carlton without Grayson's men intercepting it will be challenging. Not if we use the right messenger, Zadie said. Someone who regularly travels between ranches. Someone who wouldn't raise suspicion. Like a peddler, Adam suggested, or a mail carrier. Or a doctor, Zadie's eyes lit with inspiration. Doc Wilson makes regular rounds to all the ranches in the area. He treated my father once when he broke his arm. He's respected above suspicion, and has legitimate reason to visit both Carlton's home and Millerton, where Bradford is staying. A smile spread across Adam's face, the first real smile Zadie had seen from him. Miss Newell, you continue to impress me with your strategic thinking. The warmth that bloomed in her chest at his praise was becoming a familiar sensation. Now, we just need to get a message to Doc Wilson without exposing ourselves. His route takes him past the Marshall place every Tuesday, Adam recalled. That's tomorrow. It's only about 5 miles from here, close enough that I can make the ride even with this. He gestured to his bandaged side. You're not riding anywhere, Zadie said firmly. I'll go. Zadie. No arguments. You're injured and someone needs to maintain our secure position here. She stood, her decision made. I'll leave at first light, intercept Doc Wilson at the Marshall place, and be back before midday. Adam studied her for a long moment, then nodded. Very well, but take the revolver, not just the derringer, and at the first sign of trouble. I know, run, don't fight, I remember your lessons. That evening they composed a carefully worded message for Judge Carlton, explaining enough to pique his interest without revealing too much in case the note was intercepted. They suggested a meeting at an abandoned church some 10 miles outside Millerton, neutral ground where they could control the approaches and ensure no ambush awaited. As night fell, they shared a simple meal of dried beef and beans. The close quarters of the cabin, which had initially seemed merely practical, now felt intimate in a way that heightened Zadie's awareness of Adam. His presence across the small table, the way firelight caught in his dark hair, the quiet strength evident even in his injured state, all of it affected her in ways she was finding increasingly difficult to ignore. You should take the cot tonight, Adam said as they finished eating. I've monopolized it all day. You're injured, you need proper rest. I've slept on worse than this floor many times. He gestured to his bedroll near the fire. I'll be comfortable enough. Zadie started to protest, but recognized the stubborn set of his jaw. At least let me check your wound before we sleep. He submitted to her examination, sitting still as she carefully unwrapped the bandages. The angry red furrow along his side looked slightly better than it had that morning, though it would clearly leave a scar to join the others she could now see marking his torso, evidence of a life lived dangerously. You've been shot before, she observed, noting an older, puckered scar near his shoulder. Occupational hazard, he replied with a faint smile, though usually I'm better at avoiding it. And these, her fingers hovered over a pattern of small scars across his lower ribs. Knife, a case in Dakota territory. His voice remained casual, but she could feel tension in him as her hands worked near the old wounds. You've lived more lives than most men twice your age, she said softly, applying fresh herbs to his current injury. Not all of them worth remembering. Zadie's hands stilled. Is that why you never speak of your life before, because you don't think it's worth remembering? Adam didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice had lost its professional detachment. I don't speak of it because remembering hurts, and because the man I was then, the husband, the father, he died with them. What remained became something else, something harder. Coulter. I don't think that's entirely true, Zadie said, securing the fresh bandage. The man who saved me in that saloon, who's risked his life for justice, who treats me as an equal partner despite his initial reservations, that man has warmth in him. Compassion. Perhaps, Adam conceded. But it's been buried deep for a long time. Until now, she suggested, meeting his eyes. The look he gave her was complex, vulnerable yet wary, as if he both longed for and feared what she might see in him. Until now, he agreed quietly. The moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken feelings. Then Adam cleared his throat and moved back slightly. "You should rest," he said. "Your mission tomorrow requires you alert." Zadie recognized his retreat, not rejection, but caution. A lifetime of walls couldn't be dismantled in a few weeks, no matter how intense their shared experiences. "Good night, Adam," she said, accepting the boundaries he needed. She settled onto the cot, listening as he arranged his bedroll by the fire. Despite the simplicity of their accommodations, despite the danger that still surrounded them, Zadie realized she felt a sense of peace she hadn't known since before her father's death. In this small cabin, with this wounded detective who was slowly revealing the man beneath the hard exterior, she had found something unexpected, not just purpose or justice, but a connection that promised possibilities beyond their current mission. The question was whether Adam Newcomb would allow himself to embrace those possibilities when the time came. Morning arrived with clear skies that promised good visibility for Zadie's journey. She dressed in her practical borrowed clothes, checked the revolver, and secured the message for Doc Wilson inside her vest. "Remember," Adam instructed as she prepared to leave, "approach openly. Wilson knows me by reputation if not personally. Mention my name and my Pinkerton connection. It will lend credibility." "I know, Adam, we've been through this 3 times. He had the grace to look slightly abashed. "Force of habit. I'm not accustomed to sending others into potential danger while I remain behind." "I'll be fine," she assured him. "The Marshall place is only 5 miles, and Grayson's men have no reason to be watching there." Adam moved to help her saddle her horse, wincing slightly as the action pulled at his wound. "Be back by midday. If you're not, I'll come looking for you, injury or no." "I wouldn't expect anything less," she said, mounting smoothly. "Try not to reopen that wound while I'm gone." His hand came to rest on her leg, just above the knee, a brief, warm pressure. "Be careful, Zadie." She covered his hand with hers for a moment. "Always." The ride to the Marshall Ranch was uneventful, the morning sun gradually burning away the mist that hung in the lower valleys. Zadie kept to the tree lines where possible, avoiding open spaces that would make her visible from a distance. Adam's training had become second nature now, assessing terrain, identifying potential threats, planning escape routes as a matter of course. She arrived at the Marshall place shortly after 9 o'clock. As they'd hoped, Doc Wilson's buggy was already there, tethered outside the main house. Zadie approached cautiously, surveying the surroundings for any sign of Grayson's men before making her presence known. The doctor emerged from the house as she dismounted, a lean, white-haired man in his 60s with keen eyes that assessed her with professional interest. "Morning, miss," he called. "Something I can help you with?" Zadie stepped forward, keeping her hands visible. "Dr. Wilson, my name is Zadie Newell. I believe you treated my father once for a broken arm." Recognition dawned in his weathered face. Thaddeus Newell's girl from Coulter's Creek, his expression turned grave. "I heard about what happened there, a terrible business, and then reports of your own death which appear to have been greatly exaggerated." "Those reports were deliberately spread by the men responsible for my father's murder," she said. "The same men who have been forcing ranchers off their land across the territory." Wilson glanced around, suddenly wary. "This isn't a conversation for open air, Miss Newell. Come inside." The Marshalls were away, he explained as he led her into the house, visiting family in Helena. He had stopped to leave medication for their return. This afforded them privacy for Zadie to explain her situation. "Adam Newcomb sent me," she said once they were seated in the kitchen. "He's a Pinkerton agent investigating Everett Grayson's land schemes." Wilson's eyebrows rose. "Newcomb, I've heard that name. There was talk about a detective working undercover on one of the smaller ranches." "My father's ranch," Zadie confirmed. "We've gathered evidence of Grayson's methods, the intimidation, the falsified surveys, the manipulation of the railroad's planned route." But Grayson's men are watching Millerton. We can't approach the authorities directly. And you need my help. It wasn't a question. We need you to deliver a message to Judge Carleton, asking him to bring William Bradford, the railroad representative, to a meeting. She removed the sealed note from inside her vest. We believe the railroad will have both the motivation and the resources to stop Grayson once they understand how he's manipulating their plans. Wilson studied the note but made no move to take it. This is dangerous business, Miss Newell. Grayson has a long reach. Which is why we need someone above suspicion, someone with legitimate reason to visit both the judge and Millerton. She placed the note on the table between them. My father died because he stood up to Grayson. How many others will suffer the same fate if no one acts? The doctor was silent for a long moment, considering. Then he reached for the note. Your father was a good man. One of the few who treated me as a colleague rather than a curiosity when I first set up practice in this territory. He tucked the message into his coat. I'll deliver this, but be careful, Miss Newell. Justice is a worthy cause, but it won't protect you from bullets. I've learned that lesson already, Doctor. She stood to leave. Thank you. Don't thank me yet, Wilson cautioned. Carleton is a principled man, but he's also cautious. And Bradford is an Easterner with little understanding of frontier justice. There's no guarantee they'll agree to your meeting. They'll come, Zadie said with more confidence than she felt. The evidence we have is too compelling to ignore. She left the Marshall Ranch with a lighter heart, their plan now in motion. If all went well, Judge Carleton would receive their message by evening, and the meeting could take place as soon as tomorrow. The ride back to the trapper's cabin was as uneventful as the journey out, and Zadie found herself relaxing slightly as she approached their temporary sanctuary. The worst was behind them now, she thought. Adam's wound was healing, their evidence was secure, and soon they would have powerful allies in their fight against Grayson. It was this momentary optimism that made her careless. She approached the cabin directly rather than circling to check for signs of intrusion as Adam had taught her. It wasn't until she was within 50 yards that she noticed something wrong. The cabin door stood slightly ajar, when she knew Adam would have kept it secured. Zadie reined in her horse, every sense suddenly alert. Something was wrong. Adam would never leave the door open. Even injured, he was too careful, too experienced. She dismounted silently, drawing the revolver from her holster. Keeping low, she moved toward the cabin using the scattered trees and underbrush for cover. As she drew closer, she could hear voices from inside, more than one, and neither belonging to Adam. Boss said search everything, a gruff voice was saying. The detective must have hidden the evidence somewhere in here. There's nothing here but basic supplies, another voice replied. If they had documents, they took them when they left. Grayson's men had found their hideout, but where was Adam? Zadie crept around the side of the cabin toward a small window, staying below the sill but positioning herself to peer cautiously inside. Two men were ransacking the small space, appending their few supplies, checking for hidden compartments. Of Adam there was no sign. Cold fear gripped her. Had they captured him, killed him? Impossible to know without revealing herself, which would likely result in her own capture or death. She needed to withdraw, to think, to form a plan. Silently, she began backing away from the cabin, intending to circle around to where she'd left her horse. That was when she saw him, Adam, lying motionless behind a fallen log some 30 yards from the cabin. Blood darkened the side of his head, and his gun lay just beyond his outstretched hand. Zadie froze, torn between the tactical retreat Adam would have insisted upon and the desperate need to know if he was alive. The decision was made for her when one of the men emerged from the cabin, scanning the surrounding area. Nothing in there, he called to someone Zadie couldn't see. You sure they were using this place? Positive, came the reply from the far side of the clearing. A third man Zadie hadn't accounted for. Found their horses' tracks this morning, leading right here. Zadie sank lower into the underbrush, mind racing. 3 men that she could identify, potentially more. Adam incapacitated. The odds were overwhelmingly against her. But if she fled now, Adam would almost certainly die, if he wasn't dead already. and everything they had worked for would be lost. She needed a distraction, something to draw the men away from both Adam and herself long enough to reach him. Her gaze fell on her horse, still tethered where she'd left it on the other side of the clearing. Taking a deep breath, Zadie aimed carefully at a fallen branch near the animal. The shot rang out, sending birds scattering from nearby trees. The horse reared in panic, pulling free from its hasty tether and bolting away from the noise. "What the hell?" one of the men shouted. "Over there." Two of them immediately ran toward the sound, weapons drawn. The third hesitated, looking around more cautiously. It was the opening Zadie needed. While the men were focused on the direction of the shot, she darted from her hiding place toward Adam, keeping low and using the natural contours of the ground for cover. She reached him just as shouts indicated the men had realized the shot was a diversion. Dropping to her knees beside Adam, she pressed fingers to his throat, nearly sobbing with relief when she felt a pulse, weak but present. "Adam," she whispered urgently. "Adam, wake up." His eyelids fluttered, but he didn't regain consciousness. Blood matted his hair where he'd been struck, likely with a rifle butt rather than a bullet, given the nature of the wound. Zadie grabbed his revolver from where it had fallen, now armed with 2 guns. Not enough to win a firefight against 3 experienced men, but perhaps enough to cover their escape. "There she is," the shout came from alarmingly close. "By the log." A bullet splintered bark inches from her head. Zadie returned fire without fully exposing herself, not aiming to hit but to force the men to take cover. "Adam," she tried again, shaking him gently. "I need you to wake up, we have to move." This time his eyes opened, unfocused at first, then sharpening as awareness returned. "Zadie," he mumbled, "how many?" "3 that I've seen," she replied, firing again to keep the men at bay. "Can you stand?" He struggled to sit up, one hand going to his bleeding head. "Think so, help me." Supporting him with one arm while maintaining covering fire with the other was nearly impossible, but somehow they managed to get Adam to his feet. He swayed dangerously for a moment before steadying himself against the log. "My gun," he said, his voice stronger now. "I have it." She pressed the revolver into his hand. "We need to reach the trees. Can you run?" Adam's face was pale beneath the blood, but his eyes were clear and determined. "Just watch me." Together they made a dash for the denser forest beyond the clearing, bullets kicking up dirt at their heels. Adam was slower than usual but moving under his own power, which was more than Zadie had dared hope for minutes earlier. Once within the shelter of the trees, they kept moving, putting distance between themselves and their pursuers. Adam leaned heavily on Zadie at times but remained conscious and alert, directing them toward a rocky ravine where they might lose the men following them. "The evidence," he gasped as they half-slid down a steep embankment. "Tell me you have it." "In my saddlebag," she replied, "which is currently attached to a panicked horse running who knows where." Despite their dire situation, Adam managed a pained laugh. "Of course it is. Nothing's ever simple." They reached the bottom of the ravine, where a small stream provided both cover for their tracks and a clear path forward. The sound of pursuit had faded somewhat but not disappeared entirely. "They'll follow the ravine," Adam said, pausing to catch his breath. "It's the obvious route. We need to do something less obvious." "Like what?" Zadie asked, checking his head wound with gentle fingers. The bleeding had slowed, but he'd lost enough blood to concern her. "Like climb," he said, nodding toward the ravine's opposite wall, a steep, rocky slope that would be challenging for someone in perfect health, let alone a man with a head wound and a recently shot side. "You can't be serious," she protested. "In your condition." "In my condition, I'll slow you down on any other route," he interrupted. "They'll expect us to follow the water. The climb will surprise them. Give us time." Zadie wanted to argue, but recognized the tactical sense of his plan. "Fine, but I go first, help pull you up." The climb was grueling. The slope wasn't quite vertical, but it was steep enough to require both hands, which meant holstering their weapons and becoming temporarily defenseless. Loose rocks threatened to give way under their weight, and every handhold had to be tested before being trusted. Zadie moved slightly ahead as planned, finding secure positions from which she could extend a hand to help Adam navigate the more difficult sections. His face grew increasingly pale, his breathing labored, but he continued without complaint. They were 3/4 of the way up when a shout from below confirmed Adam's prediction. Grayson's men had indeed followed the ravine and had just spotted them on the slope. "Keep going," Adam urged as the first shots rang out, ricocheting off rocks around them. "They can't aim effectively from that angle." Zadie increased her pace, ignoring the burning in her arms and the sharp stones cutting into her palms. Just a few more feet to the top, to relative safety. A cry from below made her look back. Adam had slipped, sliding several feet down the rocky incline before managing to catch himself. Fresh blood soaked through his shirt where the fall had reopened his bullet wound. "Go," he shouted up at her. "Reach the top." Instead, Zadie secured her position and extended her arm toward him. "Take my hand." For a moment she thought he might refuse, might insist she save herself while he held off their pursuers. But then his hand gripped hers, strong despite his injuries, and together they made the final push to the top of the ravine. They collapsed on the relatively flat ground above, both gasping for breath. Zadie could hear their pursuers beginning the same climb, but the men were heavier, less nimble, and now faced the additional challenge of potential gunfire from above. "We need to keep moving," Adam said, struggling to his feet. "Put as much distance between us and them as possible." "You're bleeding again," Zadie noted with concern, eyeing the spreading stain on his shirt. "I'll live." He drew his revolver, checking that it was still loaded. "Which is more than I can say for them if they follow us much farther." The cold determination in his voice sent a chill through Zadie. This was the side of Adam she had glimpsed before but rarely seen in full, the ruthless hunter beneath the principled detective. "We don't need to kill them," she said as they began moving away from the ravine's edge. "Just evade them long enough to reach safety." "And where exactly is safety now?" Adam asked, his tone bitter. "Our cabin's compromised." "Your horse is gone with our evidence. Grayson's men are combing these hills for us. We still have the meeting with Judge Carlton and Bradford, if Doc Wilson delivered our message." "A meeting we now have no evidence to present at," Adam reminded her. "All our documentation was in your saddlebag, remember." Zadie stopped walking. "Not all of it," she said slowly. "I kept the most important map with me." She reached inside her vest, producing a folded paper. The one showing the original railroad survey alongside Grayson's falsified version. "I wanted to study it further if I had to wait for the doctor." Adam stared at the map, then at Zadie with something like awe. "You continue to surprise me, Miss Newell." "Pleasantly, I hope." The ghost of a smile crossed his face. "Decidedly so." A shout from the ravine reminded them of their pursuers. They continued moving, following a game trail that led deeper into the forested hills. Adam's pace was slower now, his strength visibly flagging as blood loss and the exertion of their escape took their toll. "We need to find shelter," Zadie said as afternoon shadows lengthened around them. "Somewhere to rest and tend your wounds." "Agreed, but not a building this time, too easily surrounded." Adam pointed ahead. "There's a rock formation about a mile north of here, natural caves." "Defensible position." "How do you know about these caves?" "Scouted the entire area when I first arrived. Always know your terrain and possible bolt holes." He stumbled slightly, catching himself against a tree. "Basic survival in this line of work." Zadie moved to support him, slipping an arm around his waist. "Let me help you, no heroics." For once he didn't protest, leaning on her as they continued their journey. His body was warm against hers, his breathing increasingly labored. Zadie found herself acutely aware of both his vulnerability and his enduring strength, the paradox that defined Adam Newcomb. The caves proved to be exactly as he described. A series of shallow natural shelters formed where massive boulders had tumbled against one another ages ago. Not deep enough to be truly dark, but sufficient to provide protection from weather and casual observation. "Perfect," Zadie declared as they reached the formation. "Help me find something to start a fire. You need warmth. Fire will give away our position, Adam objected, though he sank gratefully onto a relatively flat boulder. Not if we keep it small and place it where the rocks will hide most of the light. She began gathering twigs and dry grass. Besides, without warmth and proper treatment, that wound will fester. What good is avoiding Grayson's men if you die of infection? Adam watched her work with an expression that mingled respect with something warmer. When did you become so practical about survival, Zadie Newell? Around the time a stubborn Pinkerton agent decided I was worth saving, she replied without looking up from her task. Now hush and conserve your strength while I save you in return. She managed to start a small, nearly smokeless fire in the most sheltered part of their chosen cave. Its meager warmth was still welcome as the mountain air cooled with approaching evening. Zadie used the fire to heat water in Adam's canteen, then set about cleaning his reopened side wound and the new injury to his head. "How did they find you?" she asked as she worked. "At the cabin." Adam winced as she probed the head wound. "Carelessness on my part. I heard a horse approaching and assumed it was you returning. Stepped outside without proper caution." His mouth twisted in self-recrimination. "Rookie mistake." "You were injured and concerned," she countered, "not careless. Same result either way." He fell silent as she continued her ministrations, then added quietly, "I was worried when you didn't return on schedule." The simple admission revealed more about his feelings than any grand declaration might have. Zadie's hands gentled further as she bandaged his head with strips torn from her shirt. "I'm sorry I worried you," she said. "Dr. Wilson was there as expected. He agreed to deliver our message." "Good. That's something at least." Adam tested the bandage on his head with careful fingers. "Thank you, this is becoming a habit, you patching me up." "Let's not make it a regular occurrence," she suggested with forced lightness. "I'm running out of shirts to tear up." As night fell fully, they took turns keeping watch, though Zadie insisted Adam take the longer rest periods. The small fire had burned down to embers, providing minimal heat but enough to keep the worst of the mountain chill at bay. During her watch, Zadie studied the map she'd saved, their one remaining piece of tangible evidence against Grayson. The original survey, conducted by the railroad's engineers, showed a route that would have bypassed Grayson's holdings entirely. The falsified version, with subtle but significant alterations, rerouted the planned track through land Grayson either already controlled or was in the process of acquiring through intimidation and fraud. The financial implications were staggering. Land that might be worth a few dollars an acre would increase 20-fold in value once designated as a future railroad stop. Multiply that across thousands of acres, and Grayson stood to make a fortune all through manipulation of survey markers and maps. He was clever. Adam's voice came softly from where he rested, changing just enough to serve his purposes, without making the alterations obvious to anyone not comparing the maps side by side. Zadie hadn't realized he was awake. "Do you think this will be enough to convince Bradford?" "It's a start. The railroad doesn't tolerate interference with their planning." Adam shifted to sit beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. "But we'll need more to bring legal consequences down on Grayson, something directly linking him to the falsified surveys. Like testimony from the surveyors he bribed." "Exactly. Or documentation of payments." Adam studied the map in the dim light of the dying embers, though finding either will be challenging now that he knows we're actively building a case against him. They fell into companionable silence for a time, the night sounds of the forest surrounding their small shelter. Despite their precarious situation, injured, hunted, with limited resources, Zadie felt a curious sense of peace sitting beside this complex man who had entered her life so unexpectedly. "What will you do when this is over?" she asked, echoing her question from days earlier. "If we succeed in bringing down Grayson and reclaiming my father's ranch." Adam was quiet so long she thought he might not answer. When he did, his voice held a note she hadn't heard before: uncertainty. "I don't know," he admitted. "For 6 years the next case has always been waiting, the next criminal to track, the next wrong to right, He looked down at his hands. I never allowed myself to consider alternatives. And now, he turned to face her, his features half-shadowed in the fading firelight. Now I find myself thinking about possibilities I'd convinced myself were forever closed to me. Zadie's heart quickened at the way he was looking at her, as if seeing something precious and unexpected. "What kind of possibilities?" she asked softly. Instead of answering with words, Adam reached out, his fingers gently brushing a strand of hair from her face. The touch lingered, warm against her cheek, before he slowly leaned forward. The kiss was tentative at first, a question rather than a demand. Zadie answered by moving closer, her hand coming to rest against his chest where she could feel his heartbeat accelerating to match her own. When they finally broke apart, Adam's expression held wonder and a vulnerability she'd never seen him allow before. "I didn't think I would ever feel this again," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "After Margaret. I believed that part of me was dead." "And now," Zadie whispered, "now I'm not so sure." His hand covered hers where it rested against his chest. "You've woken something I thought was gone forever. And it terrifies me, Zadie." "Why?" "Because caring means vulnerability. It means having something to lose." His eyes held hers in the darkness, "and I've learned how devastating loss can be." Zadie understood then the true nature of Adam's carefully constructed walls, not coldness or indifference, but fear. Fear of feeling too deeply, of opening himself to the possibility of being shattered again as he had been when his family died. "There are no guarantees in this life," she said gently. "The frontier teaches us that, if nothing else. But closing yourself off from connection isn't protection, it's just another kind of death." Adam's hand tightened over hers. "When did you become so wise, Miss Newell?" "Around the time I watched my father die and had to decide whether to let grief destroy me or transform me." She leaned forward to rest her forehead against his. "I chose transformation, and I think perhaps you're finally ready to do the same." He didn't answer in words, but the way he drew her closer, his arms encircling her with careful strength, told Zadie everything she needed to know. Whatever the future held, whether they succeeded against Grayson or failed, whether they lived beyond the coming days or died in the attempt, Adam Newcomb had taken the first step toward reclaiming the capacity for love that grief had buried. And that in itself was a kind of victory. Dawn found them still in the cave, having dozed in shifts throughout the night. Adam's condition had stabilized, no fever had developed, suggesting the wounds remained clean, but he was weak from blood loss and the exertion of their escape. "The meeting with Coulter and Bradford is set for this evening," Zadie reminded him as they shared the last of their provisions. "At the abandoned church outside Millerton." "We need to move soon if we're going to make it in time," Adam agreed. "But carefully, Grayson's men are still searching the area." They left their temporary shelter as the sun cleared the eastern ridges, moving cautiously through the forested terrain. Adam insisted on setting their course to intersect the main trail between Millerton and the meeting location. "Why risk the main trail?" Zadie asked. "Wouldn't back country be safer?" "Normally, yes. But we need transportation if we're going to reach the meeting in time." Adam pointed ahead. "And the mail coach runs along that route every Thursday afternoon." "You want to flag down the mail coach? Won't that expose us?" "Less risk than walking into Millerton," he countered. "The driver owes me a favor from a case last year. He'll give us a ride without asking questions." Adam's knowledge of the territory and its rhythms continued to impress Zadie. By midday they had reached a position overlooking the trail where they could observe without being seen. "There," Adam said after an hour of waiting, "right on schedule." The mail coach appeared around a bend, moving at a steady pace with its two-horse team. As it approached their position, Adam stood and moved to the edge of the tree line, raising one hand in a specific pattern. To Zadie's relief, the coach slowed, then stopped. The driver, a weathered man in his 50s, peered in their direction before recognition dawned on his face. "Well, I'll be damned," he called. "Newcomb, heard you might be in the area." "Hello, Frank," Adam replied, gesturing for Zadie to join him. "We could use a ride if you're headed toward Millerton." The driver's eyes widened slightly at Zadie's appearance, then narrowed at Adam's obviously injured state. "Looks like you could use more than just a ride, friend. Hop in. No other passengers today." They climbed aboard gratefully, settling into the coach's worn leather seats. As the vehicle lurched back into motion, Adam leaned toward Zadie. "Frank's reliable," he assured her in a low voice. "Won't ask questions he doesn't need answers to, and won't mention giving us a ride to anyone who might be interested." The journey to Millerton passed without incident, the rocking motion of the coach nearly lulling Zadie to sleep after the tension and exertion of the past 24 hours. Adam remained alert despite his injuries, watching the passing landscape for any sign of pursuit. Frank dropped them at a crossroads a mile outside Millerton, where the trail to the abandoned church branched off from the main road. "Whatever you're mixed up in, Newcomb, watch your back," the driver advised as they disembarked. "Word is Grayson's offering good money for information about a certain detective and a young woman traveling together." "Appreciated, Frank," Adam replied. "You never saw us." "Saw who?" the driver answered with a wink before flicking the reins to set his team in motion once more. They walked the remaining distance to the church, arriving with an hour to spare before the scheduled meeting time. The building was as Adam had described it, a simple wooden structure abandoned years ago when the congregation built a larger church in Millerton itself. Time and weather had taken their toll, but the basic structure remained sound, offering both shelter and clear sightlines to approach routes. "Perfect for our purposes," Adam observed as they conducted a thorough inspection of the building and surrounding area. Multiple exits, elevated position for observation, solid walls for protection if things go badly. "You think Carlton might betray us?" Zadie asked, surprised. "I think taking precautions has kept me alive this long," he replied. "We trust but verify." They positioned themselves to observe the trail leading from Millerton, Adam with his spyglass, Zadie with the revolver ready. As the appointed hour approached, tension grew between them. "What if they don't come?" Zadie voiced the fear that had been growing. "What if our one remaining piece of evidence isn't enough?" "Then we find another way," Adam said simply. "This isn't over until Grayson answers for your father's death, one way or another." His quiet determination reassured her. Whatever happened, Adam wouldn't abandon their cause or her. Just as the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, Adam stiffened beside her. "Riders coming," he announced, adjusting the spyglass. "2 men. One matches Carlton's description from the gathering at Grayson's. The other is better dressed, Eastern cut to his clothes, likely Bradford." Relief flooded through Zadie. They came. "So it appears, but stay alert. They could have been followed, or this could be a trap." They watched as the 2 men approached, riding at a measured pace, scanning the surroundings with the caution of people who understood the risks they were taking. When they reached the church, they dismounted and tethered their horses to a fallen fence post. "Judge Carlton, Mr. Bradford," Zadie called from the doorway, keeping to the shadows. "Thank you for coming." The older of the 2 men, Carlton, with his distinguished silver hair and judicial bearing, stepped forward. "Miss Newell, Dr. Wilson delivered your message. Said it was a matter of justice and territorial integrity." "It is," she confirmed, moving into view but keeping her hand near her holstered weapon. "Please come inside. What we have to show you is best discussed away from potential observers." The men exchanged glances, then approached cautiously. As they entered the church, Adam stepped from the shadows to the side, positioning himself where he could watch both the visitors and the approaches outside. "Gentlemen," he greeted them, "Adam Newcomb, Pinkerton Detective Agency." Bradford, younger than Carlton, with the polished appearance of an Easterner still adjusting to territorial customs, studied Adam with interest. "The agency's reputation precedes you, Mr. Newcomb," he said, "though I admit I'm curious why a Pinkerton agent is interested in railroad surveys." "Because those surveys are being deliberately falsified to benefit certain private interests," Adam replied directly. "Specifically, the interests of Everett Grayson." "That's a serious accusation," Carlton observed. "I assume you have evidence." Zadie produced their precious map. We had more, much more, but circumstances forced us to travel light. She spread the document on a broken pew. This shows the original railroad survey alongside the version Grayson has been promoting through his influence with territorial officials. Both men leaned forward to examine the map, Bradford with particular interest. The alterations are subtle, the railroad man noted, but significant in terms of economic impact. This diverts the main line through several parcels recently acquired by Grayson Land Company. Exactly, Adam confirmed. Grayson has been systematically intimidating smaller ranchers and homesteaders whose land stands in the way of his plan. Those who resist face escalating pressure, damaged property, threatened livestock, and ultimately violence. Like what happened to my father, Zadie added quietly. Carlton's eyes sharpened. You're alleging Grayson was behind the shooting in Coulter's Creek. We know he was, Adam stated flatly. His enforcer, Mac Durham, gave the order. And later, Grayson himself confirmed it to us during a confrontation at his ranch. You confronted Grayson directly, Bradford asked, clearly impressed despite his professional reserve. We did more than confront him, Zadie said. We infiltrated his gathering to search for evidence. Unfortunately, we were discovered. Yet you escaped, Carlton observed, eyeing Adam's bandaged head. Barely, Adam acknowledged, and Grayson's men have been hunting us ever since. Which is why we needed this meeting. We can't approach the territorial authorities directly. Too many are in Grayson's pocket. Bradford studied the map again, his expression thoughtful. This alteration would cost my company significant additional expense in construction. Terrain in the diverted section is less favorable, requiring more bridges and grading. He looked up at them. The railroad takes a very dim view of manipulation of our surveys, Mr. Newcomb. Exactly why we brought this to you, Adam replied. You have resources and motivation that territorial law enforcement might lack. What exactly are you asking of us? Carlton inquired. For you, judge, legal intervention, a federal investigation into the falsified surveys, the land seizures, and ultimately the murder of Zadie Newell and others who stood against Grayson. Adam turned to Bradford. And from you, sir, corporate pressure. The railroad's lawyers challenging Grayson's land claims based on the fraudulent surveys. A two-pronged attack, Bradford mused. Clever. But risky, Carlton cautioned. Grayson has many allies, including the territorial governor. The governor can't stand against both federal authority and railroad interests, Adam countered, especially with evidence of corruption. The judge considered this, then nodded slowly. I've long suspected Grayson's methods were beyond the pale of legality, but proving it has been challenging. This map is just the beginning, Zadie assured him. With your support, we can gather testimony from others who have been pressured by Grayson. Create a case too substantial to ignore. And what do you seek personally from this, Miss Newell? Carlton asked. Beyond justice for your father. The return of our ranch, she replied without hesitation. An assurance that others won't suffer as we have. Bradford and Carlton exchanged looks that suggested a private communication. Then Bradford spoke. The railroad has no interest in being associated with land fraud or intimidation. If what you've shown us proves accurate, we would certainly pursue legal remedies against Mr. Grayson. He straightened his jacket. I can telegraph our corporate attorneys in Chicago tomorrow morning. And I, Carlton added, can request a federal marshal to begin an official investigation. One outside Grayson's sphere of influence. Hope rose in Zadie's chest, the first real hope she'd felt since that terrible night in Coulter's Creek. Then you believe us, you'll help. We'll take the first steps, Carlton clarified. But building a case strong enough to bring down someone of Grayson's standing will require more than this single map and your testimony. We understand, Adam said, and we're prepared to continue our investigation more openly now with your support. The rest of the meeting focused on practical matters, secure communication methods, potential witnesses, legal strategies. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows through the church's broken windows. They finalized their plans. "We should return to Millerton before dark," Carlton said, rising. "Bradford and I arrived separately, and should leave the same way to avoid drawing attention." "Agreed," Adam said. "We'll remain here until morning, then begin approaching potential witnesses." The men departed with handshakes and promises of swift action. As their hoofbeats faded into the distance, Zadie turned to Adam, unable to contain her cautious optimism. "We did it," she said. "We've started something that Grayson can't simply brush aside." "We've taken the first step," Adam tempered, though his eyes held the same hope she felt. "There's still a long road ahead." They secured the church as best they could for the night, barricading the main door and positioning themselves where they could observe all approaches while remaining hidden. As darkness fell completely, they shared the small amount of provisions Frank had given them from the mail coach's emergency supplies. "What happens now?" Zadie asked as they sat side by side on a relatively intact pew. "Practically speaking, we wait for word from Carlton about the federal marshal. Once that official protection is in place, we can move more openly." Adam shifted to accommodate his injuries. "Then we start building our case in earnest, gathering statements from other ranchers who have been pressured, documenting the pattern of land acquisition around the railroad route. And Grayson, he won't sit idle while we do this." "No, he won't. Which is why we'll need to be careful until federal authority is established." Adam's hand found hers in the darkness. "But we're no longer alone in this fight, Zadie. That changes everything." She laced her fingers through his, drawing comfort from the connection. "Does it change what happens after, what you were considering when all this is over?" Adam was silent for a moment, his thumb tracing gentle circles on the back of her hand. "The possibilities I mentioned, they're becoming clearer to me, more defined." "Would you care to define them for me?" she asked, her heart quickening at the warmth in his voice. He turned toward her, his free hand coming up to cup her cheek. "I came to this territory to hunt a criminal. I never expected to find something worth staying for," his voice lowered, "someone worth building a new life around." "Adam," she breathed, leaning into his touch. "I don't know if I remember how to be anything but what I've become these past 6 years," he continued. "The man who had a family, who knew how to love freely. He's been buried deep for a long time." "But not gone," she whispered. "I've seen him, in moments when you forget to guard yourself. When you look at me and let me see past your walls. That's the miracle of you, Zadie Newell." His voice caught slightly. "You've made me want to find that man again, to see if there might still be a chance for the life I thought was forever closed to me." In the darkness of the abandoned church, surrounded by danger, yet somehow sheltered in this moment of connection, Zadie felt a certainty settle over her. Whatever challenges lay ahead, Grayson's resistance, the building of their case, the reclaiming of her father's land, they would face them together. And beyond those challenges lay possibilities neither of them had dared to imagine weeks earlier. "There's a chance, Adam," she said, drawing closer until their foreheads touched. "I believe that with everything in me." His kiss was different this time, not tentative but certain, deep with promise and healing. When they finally broke apart, Zadie could feel something fundamental had shifted between them. The partnership formed in crisis had transformed into something far more enduring. They spent the night in the church, taking turns keeping watch, though Adam insisted on longer shifts despite his injuries. By morning, no sign of pursuit or threat had materialized, suggesting their meeting with Carlton and Bradford had gone undetected by Grayson's men. As they prepared to leave, a rider approached from the direction of Millerton. Adam immediately positioned himself at a window, revolver ready, while Zadie took cover behind the altar. "Single rider," Adam reported, moving openly, not attempting to conceal his approach. They watched tensely as the horse and rider drew closer. Then Adam relaxed slightly. "It's Dr. Wilson," he said, surprised, "alone from what I can see." The doctor dismounted outside the church, calling out before approaching the door. "Miss Newcomb, it's Wilson. I bring news from Judge Carlton." They admitted him cautiously, Adam checking for signs of coercion or pursuit before securing the door again. "The judge sent me," Wilson confirmed, taking in their vigilant posture and Adam's injured state with a professional eye. He thought a doctor might draw less attention than a formal messenger. "What news?" Zadie asked eagerly. "The federal marshal arrives on tomorrow's stage from Helena." Carlton has already briefed him by telegraph. Wilson produced an envelope. "This is for you, Newcomb. Official documentation of your status as a cooperating witness in a federal investigation. Should provide some protection against local interference." Adam accepted the envelope with visible relief. That was fast work by the judge. "He's been waiting for an opportunity to move against Grayson for some time," Wilson explained. "Just needed the right leverage." He turned to Zadie. "Bradford has also been busy. Telegraphed his company headquarters last night. Their lawyers are already preparing injunctions against Grayson's land claims based on the survey discrepancies." "That's wonderful news," Zadie said, hope swelling within her. Wilson nodded, then became more somber. "But there's more you should know. Grayson is aware something's happening. He's called in additional men from his other holdings. The town is filling with hard cases, gunmen mostly." "He's preparing for resistance," Adam observed grimly. "Consolidating his forces." "Which makes your next steps more dangerous," Wilson agreed. "Carlton suggested you might be safer waiting outside town until the marshal arrives." Adam exchanged glances with Zadie before responding. "The judge is right about the danger but wrong about our course. This is precisely the time to press forward, while Grayson is reacting rather than planning." "What do you have in mind?" Wilson asked. "We need to secure statements from other victims of Grayson's expansion, ranchers who have been forced out, witnesses to intimidation. Build our case while federal authority is en route." The doctor frowned. "That means traveling to outlying ranches, exposing yourselves." "Yes," Adam acknowledged, "but with your help we can do it more safely." "My help?" "You visit these ranches regularly, know which families have suffered under Grayson's tactics. Could introduce us without raising suspicion." Wilson considered this, stroking his beard thoughtfully. "It's risky, but I suppose no riskier than what you've already undertaken." He looked between them. "Very well. I have rounds to make today anyway. You can accompany me as medical assistants, perhaps." "Perfect," Adam said, his first genuine smile in days appearing. "When do we leave?" "As soon as I've had a look at those injuries of yours," the doctor replied firmly. "I didn't come all this way to have you collapse on me from untreated wounds." While Wilson examined and properly treated Adam's injuries, Zadie stepped outside to check their surroundings, breathing deeply of the clear morning air. For the first time since her father's death, she felt the weight of their situation beginning to lift. They had allies now, a plan, legal protection on the way, and perhaps most importantly, she and Adam had found in each other something neither had expected, the possibility of healing, of building something new from the ashes of their respective losses. When she returned inside, Wilson was packing his medical bag while Adam adjusted the fresh bandages on his side. "Your detective is lucky to be alive," the doctor informed her. "That head wound could have been much worse, and the bullet graze was showing early signs of infection." "I told you so," Zadie said to Adam, unable to resist the small triumph. "Yes, you did," he conceded with good grace. "Fortunately, I'm surrounded by people determined to keep me breathing despite my best efforts to the contrary." Wilson snorted, a common affliction among men of action. "Now, if you're both ready, we should be on our way. I have 3 ranches to visit today, all with stories that might interest you." They departed on horseback, Wilson on his own mount, Zadie and Adam sharing a spare horse the doctor had brought at Carlton's suggestion. The arrangement required them to ride closely together, Adam behind Zadie, his arms around her to hold the reins. Despite the practical necessity, Zadie found herself acutely aware of his presence, his chest warm against her back as they rode. Their first stop was the Hendricks place, a modest ranch some 10 miles outside Millerton. As they approached, Wilson outlined what they might expect. James Hendricks refused to sell to Grayson last spring. 2 weeks later, his barn burned down. A month after that, his best breeding bull was found shot. No witnesses, of course. But everyone knew who was responsible, Adam surmised. Everyone with eyes to see, Wilson confirmed. Hendricks held out longer than most, but eventually he gave in. Sold for half what the land was worth and moved his family to Oregon. His son stayed behind to work the final harvest before the transfer of ownership. They found young Thomas Hendricks repairing a fence line, his face weathered beyond his 20 years by sun and hardship. Wilson made the introductions carefully, establishing Adam's credentials and their purpose. Federal investigation, Thomas repeated, hope and wariness battling in his expression. Bit late for us, isn't it? Pa's already gone, land's already signed over. Not too late to bring Grayson to justice, Zadie countered, or to potentially invalidate sales made under duress. That caught his attention. You mean we might get our ranch back? It's possible, Adam said cautiously, with proper testimony about the pressure tactics used against your family. Thomas leaned on his fence post, considering. Grayson's men would kill me if they knew I was talking to you. The federal marshal arrives tomorrow, Adam assured him. Providing protection for witnesses will be his first priority. And in the meantime, the young man asked pointedly. In the meantime, you're consulting with your doctor about a persistent cough, Wilson interjected smoothly. Nothing suspicious about that. Thomas laughed without humor. Clever, he straightened, decision made. All right, I'll tell you what happened. Every dirty detail of how Grayson drove us off our land. His testimony was damning. Threats delivered by Durham personally, livestock mysteriously dying, nocturnal gunshots that kept the family on edge for weeks. The pattern matched what had happened to the Newells and others, establishing a clear methodology to Grayson's expansion. Adam carefully documented Thomas's account, getting specifics about dates, witnesses, and the eventual forced sale. By the time they finished, the young man seemed both relieved and energized. Others will talk too now that there's federal interest, he told them. The Petersons, the McIntyres, they all suffered the same tactics. We'll speak to as many as we can before the marshal arrives, Adam promised. Building the strongest possible case. As they prepared to leave for their next stop, Thomas pulled Zadie aside. Sorry about your pa, he said awkwardly. He was a good man. Played at my sister's wedding last year. Thank you, Zadie replied, touched by the simple acknowledgement. He would be glad to know people are finally standing up to Grayson. Their next 2 stops yielded similar results. Families who had suffered under Grayson's expansion, willing to testify once assured of federal protection. By late afternoon, they had gathered statements from 7 individuals, each corroborating the pattern of intimidation, property damage, and eventual capitulation. This is more than I hoped for in a single day, Adam said as they rode back toward Millerton. With these testimonies and our survey evidence, the marshal will have a solid foundation for his investigation. People have been waiting for someone to stand up to Grayson, Wilson observed. To show that resistance is possible. And that's what worries me, Adam replied. Grayson must sense the tide turning against him. A man like that is most dangerous when cornered. Which is why you're both staying at my place tonight, Wilson said firmly. In town, where the marshal can find you easily tomorrow, but not so exposed as a hotel would be. It was a sensible precaution, and neither Adam nor Zadie objected. As darkness fell, they approached Millerton from the east, avoiding the main street in favor of back lanes that led to Wilson's modest home on the town's edge. The doctor's residence combined living quarters with a small medical practice, examination room in front, living spaces behind. Wilson showed them to a spare bedroom with visible embarrassment. Only have the one extra room, I'm afraid. Was going to put Newcomb on a cot in my study, but with those injuries. This will be fine, doctor, Zadie assured him, fighting a blush. We've shared closer quarters these past weeks. After a simple but satisfying dinner, the first proper meal they'd had in days, Wilson excused himself to check on a patient across town. "Lock up behind me," he instructed. "I'll knock 3 times, pause, then twice more when I return." Left alone in the comfortable parlor, Zadie and Adam experienced a sudden awkwardness that had been absent during their wilderness ordeal. Civilization, even in this limited form, seemed to reintroduce conventions that their survival situation had temporarily suspended. "You should rest," Zadie suggested, breaking the silence. "You heard what Dr. Wilson said about those injuries." "I've had worse," Adam replied, though he did settle more comfortably in his chair. "And we should discuss our next steps. The marshal will want a complete briefing when he arrives." "Always the detective," she observed with a fond smile, "even now with everything changing around us." "Old habits," he acknowledged, "though perhaps not entirely healthy ones." Zadie moved to sit closer to him, drawn by the reflective note in his voice. "What do you mean?" Adam studied the fire for a moment before answering. "When Margaret and our son died, I buried myself in work. Tracking, hunting, bringing men to justice. It gave me purpose when everything else was gone." He looked up at her. "But purpose isn't the same as living, is it?" "No," she agreed softly, "it's not. These past weeks with you," he paused, searching for words, "you haven't just helped me with this case, Zadie. You've reminded me there's more to existence than the next criminal, the next mission." "What else is there, Adam?" she asked, though she thought she knew the answer, hoped she knew. "Connection," he said simply. "Caring about someone enough that your own survival becomes secondary to theirs. Building something together rather than just preventing."